Yeah, once we go live, we go serious. We're still not live yet. That's the reason. Do you mind pinning that, Rida? Well, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Today, inshallah, we're going to be talking about spirituality in Islam. It was really upon the request of Rida. And when we're talking about spirituality, I must admit, some of the talk is really going to be influenced with the society that we're living in, especially that right now, everyone is actually talking spirituality. All of a sudden, that topic, not only in Christian areas, but meaning like St. Thomas or St. Catherine, or even in other areas that are considered secular, like the U of M or different community colleges. Right now, the hot topic is really spirituality, but then spirituality is becoming this word that even a secular, even atheists are right now, I would say, adopting the term, and Muslim students are really getting lost into, how expansive can the term actually be? Can we embrace spirituality in a sense of where it is, quote unquote, what they would call inclusive? Can spirituality be your own type of meditation that involves you embracing your own body, your own needs, your own understanding of ethics and morality, and what really does it mean? So that's why I actually wanted to talk about it, because in the community that we are living in, whether it's especially your children, that at many times they're speaking about spirituality and you're thinking of it, they're talking about something good. Who would think of spirituality as something evil? You would always think of it as, well, it's good. So how is Islamic spirituality different? And of course, when we're speaking about spirituality, you always have to start with the definition, but what do people mean by spirituality, the people that are around us? So most of the times, and believe it or not, you even have atheists that are speaking about spirituality in a sense where it's spirituality to mean it's embracing your understanding of the common good, or your understanding of trying to embrace a different definition of trying to be influential, trying to be living your own self, and all these different things. So when you look at spirituality, the different issues that come to mind are things like meditation, prayer, leaving modern life and being simple, monks leaving materialism and living in oneself, contemplation, running away from life, searching for answers on what is behind life and death. Now, here's one thing, is that, of course, when you're looking at these terminologies that that are up on the screen, it's really important to realize that when you're looking at spirituality, you're looking at different ends. The first end, in where you're looking at things like Buddhists and Hindus, and the different that let's say the exacerbation from oneself and life, in where you're disconnecting your body from whatever takes it and sucks it into life more, in where Buddha himself actually considered that in order to attain spirituality, he needed to totally stay away and exacerbate himself away from the different materialistic things, even if that meant drinking his own urine. And that's exactly something that Buddha himself had actually done in order to, quote unquote, attain spirituality. Now, of course, as human beings, we can go really far in trying to divide our own selves from our spirit, our mind, and our body, and looking at our bodies as if they were this antagonist, this paradox, this other side of our spirituality. And that's something that you would find a lot in the different religions, especially Eastern religions. And in Eastern religions, we would mean by it Buddhism, Taoism as well, Confucianism, in where there's that you separate yourself away from what would take your body and suck your body into the materialistic life, and you would focus on the spiritual side of it, which is really similar to Taoism as well, and Buddhism, like I mentioned earlier. So living modern life and being simple, even whether that was, a permanent life that you would live as monks, or whether it is a temporary lifestyle and where you would become a monk for a specific amount of time, simply because they're viewing that body is actually something that one must separate. Well, that's really also similar to what Christianity also had at one point until now, in where looking at body as this side of us that is sucking us into materialism and taking us away from being the children of God. So, when you're looking at Christianity, it embraced a lot from Eastern religions, and depending on the area that it was neighboring, that's when you would see more influences coming in. But of course, right now in the postmodern era, the understanding of spirituality has really changed. In the understanding of spirituality in the modern era is more going into a different type of materialism, in where it's totally embracing materialism. So you're living your own desire in a way where you would not feel guilty about it, and you would embrace what is presented to you as common good, or what is presented to you as ethical, and what is presented to you as well. When we're looking at common good right now, we're actually talking about postmodern lifestyle, and where it involves relativism. What does relativism mean? So relativism means that there's no specific standard to understanding ethics. There's no specific paradigm to calling something ethical or not ethical. It's all about the individual that would define something as ethical or not ethical. So in other words, it's really the individual that is the paradigm, and the individual meaning you have your understanding of what is moral, and you've got your understanding of what it means to be spiritual based on your perspective. So in other words, it's putting in that relativism into a whole pot called inclusivity. So inclusive right now, although it usually refers to the LGBTQI+, and the list goes on, but it actually sometimes, or most of the times, it includes whatever you think, however you want to define spirituality, however you don't want to define morality. It's all about you embracing the idea however you want. If it makes you feel comfortable, then so it is. Because in the postmodern times, it doesn't regard, in postmodernism, there is no definition to truth. There is no definition even to a word holding a specific meaning. So the word itself doesn't have to hold a specific meaning. So you can put in all the different meanings that suits your understanding of what that meaning should contain, what that word should mean. You define it based on how you feel about it. So this is actually the era that we're living in. So when we're looking at Christianity, when we're looking at Buddhism, Hinduism, and the list goes on, and unfortunately, right now we're even seeing Muslims do the exact same thing, in where it's embracing that idea without realizing where does it really trace back to. So everybody is talking about, well, how do you feel about what is spirituality to you? What is meditation to you? What makes you feel connected to Allah? What makes you feel religious? What is that? And then you'll get answers. Well, my spirituality is getting a sense of connecting to Allah Almighty through people, making friends, whatever it is, and the common good. And you'll see a lot of people relating to what is called social justice as the common spiritual thing. But even the term social justice right now is being redefined within relativism, in where social justice is right now defined based on the liberal understanding of social justice. And what we mean by liberal understanding, there's a lot of focus on things like abortion, LGBT. And if you look at those sides to it, you're looking at a feminist definition, you're looking at a liberal atheist definition, and the list goes on. And then you're seeing that the Muslims really, a very large number of the Muslims are actually embracing the same thoughts without them really scrutinizing and trying to dissect where those ideas are coming from. Is this really what spirituality in Islam all about? So that's why I wanted to actually, focus on that one just a little bit. A really important thing to mention when we're talking about, okay, so how is Islam different from, I'm just going to use the word Eastern to mean Taoism, Confucianism, Buddhism, Hinduism, in where they would see that the body is different than the soul and all that. So I'm just going to use that Eastern versus Western to mean postmodern, although it's not really accurate, but I couldn't find any other term. Even Western right now is really changing. So what I mean by Western is really postmodern. Maybe I should use postmodern, but so how is Islamic spirituality different from the other types of spiritualities? Why is that even important to talk about? So we're not actually right now living in, at least, as Muslims in the US, we're not living in the Eastern countries, whether it's India or even Buddhism or even neighboring other, those areas. Well, the reason why it's important is because right now, the West, in many of the ways, is trying to embrace a spirituality by separating themselves from the church. And of course, seeing the church as something, as history. We can't embrace Western, we can't embrace that, as I'm talking about, the West right now and what we're seeing in terms of spectrum, where's everything heading. So you're seeing more the universities and a lot within the West are actually embracing Eastern religions. And this is really important to talk about, because in the departments like psychology, the departments in therapy, and the departments in sociology, in humanities departments, there's a lot of talk about things like yoga, things about meditation, all these different things. Well, that's because there's that choice to choose or embrace a spirituality, but that spirituality that the West is right now not wanting to embrace. And there are different political, philosophical reasons to why, with atheism, it's trying to take in more of an atheist approach of spirituality, and Buddhism being an atheist religion, Hinduism a pagan religion, Taoism an atheist religion, more focusing on culture. That's where you see that Western phase of embracing a more atheist spirituality and taking it from places like the Eastern religions as a replacement and as an alternative to Christian spirituality. All right. So that's where you would see it infiltrating the different humanities departments here in the US, in Western universities, because it became that alternative. As human beings, you could see, even if they're an atheist, they will talk about spirituality. They will still talk about spirituality, but it's making and creating an alternative by embracing that Eastern spirituality, which is like Buddhism, Taoism, and etc., and then trying to take something which is also with agnostics trying to embrace the same. So how is that even different? Well, in Islam, it's different because the body and the soul are not antagonists. What does that mean? So in those religions, it actually viewed that the body is that area that's trying to suck you into a different world, which is the materialistic world. And the soul is something different. So if it's something different, in order for you to elevate spiritually, you have to separate yourself or exacerbate yourself away from your body. So your flesh is something that you have to divide yourself away from and that you don't want to give it. Although you might say, well, that's not really what an atheist would actually think. Well, that is true. That's not how the atheist or agnostics, or even right now the Western embracement of spirituality, although a lot of it is embraced from Eastern philosophies, but that's not necessarily the way that they would take it. But it's really important to say that other side, because not everything that Western spirituality had taken is necessarily in the complete package of how spirituality is embraced in those religions. So what is the difference? Well, the difference in an atheist understanding of spirituality, or let me call it postmodern, is that you would, instead of looking at your body as something that is sucking you away from spirituality, to actually embrace it as that's your form of spirituality. So when you look at the LGBT, for example, they're looking at it as, well, it's trying to embrace of really who I am, what I am, and it's trying to embrace my sexual desire, trying to embrace my physical needs, and not feeling the guilt is very important, of course, because it's trying to feel that that is a form of spirituality. Is everybody with me, or is anybody getting lost? Now, are you getting lost? No? Okay, good. So in most philosophical and religious thoughts, they actually consider that spirituality can only be obtained by denying your physical needs. So by denying, so same thing with Christianity and Catholicism, in where to separate yourself away from marriage, separate yourself away. And in fact, even ironically, even if you are married, the priest would recommend using masturbation as an alternative to having intimacy with your husband, because it is seen as pure. Ironically, I work at a Catholic university, and you have a number of nuns. This is real. And every time I think about it, I'm like, are you serious, people? So these nuns devoted themselves to Christ. Fair enough. But ironically, instead of having sexual relations with men and getting married, they're actually lesbians. I know. Whenever I think of it, whenever I think of it, I'm like, subhanallah, how dalal can creep into people's minds. You know, I don't know how to explain it other than nothing but dalal. Nothing but dalal. So you wanted to separate yourself from men, but instead you went to an even worse dalal. You went to an even worse dalal, and you embraced it as if it is somehow being even more devout. And of course, when we're looking at the concept of spirituality in Islam compared to the spirituality in other religions and ideologies, you're looking at in Islam, the concept of spirituality actually goes beyond the dualism of spirit and matter. What are we talking about matter? Go ahead, Yasmin.
So, what is the reality?
What is? Dalal means delusion.
Oh, okay.
Yep, dalal means delusion. It's an illusion that takes you into a delusion.
Yes.
All right. So when you don't have the right perspective, your blurry vision, you're just going to go the wrong way. Right? There you go. All right. So the concept of spirituality in Islam is actually different than other religions and ideologies, in where Islam doesn't say that it's a dual thought, it's a dual thing. It actually connects between your body and your spirituality and your mind as all together, in where it puts in that balance and considers that the core for spirituality is actually your mind and is also your body. So it's not whatsoever separated, because it regards that to get to spirituality, you also need your body. There are certain things that you need to go through. And to get to spirituality, you also need your mind in order to put the core spirituality, which actually starts from thought. Now, the other piece of it is that when we're looking at body-soul conflict, in Islam, is that at the same time, it doesn't say that you have to go for everything your body desires. And that's why it regards that racing to find pleasures in any way possible, of course, even if it contradicts his pure creation, and even, of course, went far into comparing themselves with animals rather than being a noble human being, which is in atheism. Are you guys with me here? All right. So when we're looking at the concept of body and soul, Islam is in that middle. So it's in between the two extremes. The first extreme, when we're talking about liberalism, atheism, is that it viewed that, hey, we're anyways evolved from apes, we're anyways evolved from animals, and therefore we're nothing but matter in motion. So from that sense, if we are just matter in motion, as atheism would always like to proselytize, if we are evolved from animals and if we're evolved and it was all by chance, then therefore we don't necessarily have an objective understanding and definition for morality. And therefore that whole spirit thing doesn't even exist. So for atheism, the whole idea of spirit doesn't even exist because you're nothing but matter in motion anyways. You're just matter in motion. In other words, you're just matter that somehow got combined in different biological, chemical ways, and you are what you are. Therefore, you don't really have to worry about anything metaphysical. Metaphysical meaning outside of your physical nature, outside of matter. You don't have to worry about anything of that sort, and therefore just live your life as is, which is what atheism and right now postmodernism is actually what the main core of its understanding of the body and the soul. And of course, pleasure is made as a goal, whether that was wealth, fame, ownership, sex, it's all, just make it into a goal and make that goal as your purpose in life. And this is really important because without us realizing, we have a lot within the society, and where we're seeing even the Muslims many times embracing that, in where I've got a purpose in life. What is your purpose in life? To, I don't know, adopt children from Africa and build a well or whatever it is. Well, that's not a purpose, that's a tool to get to something. And without us realizing, we're actually adopting that understanding of common good. We're not saying that giving and doing common good is wrong, but we have to be careful with what we say and what our children say, because it carries a whole philosophy. And when we say it carries a whole philosophy, when you look at philosophy, you're talking about your perspective about your own existence, your perspective about where you're heading, your purpose of life, and your perspective in how you implement it in ethics and morality. All that is actually the core of Islam. So spirituality in Islam actually starts from La ilaha illallah. Spirituality in Islam tells you, no, you cannot consider that just practicing common good as your spirituality, because that's a tool. Spirituality actually starts from how you perceive your own existence, who's behind your existence, and that acts as the dynamic of purpose in life. What is your purpose in life? So of course, when we're looking at body and soul, most people, of course, people seeking spirituality by denying, on the other hand, their physical needs, family needs, community needs, and participating in developing their community is also, when you're denying all that, your physical needs is also considered on the other side, when we said there's that two extremes. One extreme is considering that body is really what we need to what we need to give and live based on its needs. And the other side, the other extreme, is considering that no, don't give it anything. Just live. Leave your family, leave your responsibility, leave this life, leave the wealth, leave everything and go live in, who knows, a very remote island and live your spirituality there. So Islam is telling you, those are two different extremes. You're not here and you're not there, but it's actually in a middle area. So what is the Islam's point of view? The point of view actually starts from number one, which is inni ja'ilun fil ardi khalifa. Now this is really important. How did we get there? The way we got there is that when we speak about spirituality, it has to be from the very point, from the very center of who you are and what you are. What does that mean? How do we figure this out? Well, that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually sent the Anbiya. I'm starting to see people starting to get sleepy. All right, let me hold on. Let me reiterate some things. Don't worry. I'll get to you guys. Don't worry. All right. No, I know it's a very, we call it an Arabi decima, like it's a lot of meat in it. I understand that, but it's really important because if we don't understand the foundation of spirituality, if we don't understand the philosophy of it, we could easily find our families and ourselves getting off track. I know it. You expected me to talk about spirituality and make you guys all cry. All right. That's something to later come. But if you don't actually understand the main core of it, the main base, you're really going to get lost in the surface. You don't want to float on the surface. If you don't have strong basis in Aqidah, you're just going to be looking at the surface. And that's what happens within the Muslim community, in where we would, for example, go to the universities, our children go to the universities, and we're still talking about, different stories. I'm not saying they're not important, but if we're not talking about the core on the inside and the bases and the pillars, we're really just going to be swimming on the surface. And here's what happens. If somebody else is discussing the core and you're swimming on the surface, soon that surface is going to go away and another building is going to be built and it's going to take you somewhere else. And that's what we're seeing. It's building underneath you. And a lot of our students at the universities, they're actually getting another building built underneath that started from school age and then went into middle school, high school, and then university age. And then they found themselves, well, my mom was telling me about hijab, and my mom was talking to me about salah, and my mom was forcing me to read Quran, but I don't really feel anything. You understand what I'm saying? Why? Because we're talking about the surface. We're constantly talking about the outside. If we're constantly talking about the outside walls, instead of really building on the inside, we really have a problem. We really have a problem. So that's why I'm actually talking about building the base here. Are you guys with me? We're talking about building the base in where what really is spirituality and what is the core of spirituality in Islam. So the core of spirituality in Islam actually starts from the main idea. It tells you before you even talk about spirituality and what to do and talking about body and talking about the outside and the outer action in terms of ritual. Now you got to go first in the very center of it. You got to first, that understanding of who you are, what you are, and your purpose of life, that has to be in place first. And that's why when you look at the beginning, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, about the creation of man, if you don't know the past, you're not going to be able to know the future. Your past actually started when the Lord Almighty told the angels, I am creating a Khalifa. What is a Khalifa? The word Khalifa means a creation after a creation. In other words, there was another creation that preceded us. All right. Now, what was it? All these different things. That's a different debate. Right now, let me just focus on that one. Inni ja'al fil ardi khalifa. Qalu, they said, are you going to create a creation that is going to cause destruction and bloodshed? Destruction and bloodshed. Now, you got to keep in mind that the malaika don't have any skills related to what cognitive skills. They can't do math like we can. They don't have cognitive skills like we do. Intellect, they don't have that. The information that they were given is really the information that they know.
Because the knowledge that they have is only what God and that's what
Absolutely,
that's the-
because they had one purpose, which is to obey the Lord Almighty. Now, here's the thing. Then you move on to the ayah. What did they say? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just tell them, well, I know what you don't know, to make the story short. And then علم آدم الأسماء كلها. He taught Adam the names of things. When we look at the names of things, it's not light bulb, fan. That's not necessarily the name of something only. The name of it is also meaning that he was taught the function of it. He was introduced to a skill that the malaika didn't have, and that is intellect. That is intellect. So now Adam was created for a purpose. Adam was given a tool, intellect. Adam was later given another introduction in where Adam was told to not eat from a tree, but Adam gets manipulated. Adam is deceived, eats from the tree, and we know the story. But there's a very important theme that was laid out where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually tells Adam a very important theme, that this shaitan is going to be aduwwun laka wa li zawjik. The shaitan is going to be an enemy to you and your wife. Now, here's the thing. What did Adam learn more about himself? Is that he had free will. All right. So now let's get another thing. Adam is introduced that there is ja'ilun fil ardi khalifa. Malaika were wondering what the purpose of that khalifa is. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala introduces that Adam has something, an intellect. He has free will. And of course, Adam is being told that he's being tested. Therefore, this shaitan is aduwwun laka wa li zawjik. You have free will, but make sure your free will goes into the right direction. Make sure your decisions go in the right direction. You are being tested. Now, the most important things that he's being tested with, you could see part of that corner is that he's being tested. What was he asked to do and not do? Well, he was asked not to eat from the tree. But his own desire pushed him and motivated him and intrigued him to eat from the tree. What else was he introduced to? He was also introduced the potentials that his own body has in controlling his own decision making. What else was he introduced to? When he was asked and ordered to step out from the Jannah, he was also introduced that there's one thing that connects you between you and the Lord Almighty, and that is the spirit. The more you follow your body desires, the more those become the stimulants to direct you in your decision making, the farther you will be away from your ruh. Away from your ruh, your soul actually means away from your Lord Almighty. Now, Adam is introduced to a number of different things within his own self. He's introduced, I've got a test. I've got another type of tool that I could use, either mind, I've got free will, I've got a soul, I've got a body that's always stimulating me to doing the wrong thing. I also have a shaitan. You see those different corners? Now, here's one very important thing. When you look at how do I know these things exist? All right. And this is really important to talk about because that's whenever you want to talk about spirituality, you first have to actually talk about, is Muhammad ibn Abdullah a prophet of the Lord Almighty or not? Are those prophets? Where do I get the understanding? Where do I get the understanding? Where do I get the understanding of myself, the meaning of life? Where do I get it from? How do I prove this? That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually sent the prophets and the messengers, because your only way to know more about your creation, the more to know about your mind, and to even believe even in a spirit. Why would I believe in a spirit? Well, the only reason why I believe in a spirit is really because I believed in the prophets. Is because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent the prophets and the messengers to tell me that there is a spirit. The sign of it, look, a person is dead. Why do they die? What happens to them after they die? Where do they go? A person is born. They're able to think, they're able to function. Why? All these different things, we can't really get a complete answer in talking about what is philosophically called metaphysics. Metaphysics means anything that is beyond matter. Spirit is beyond matter. There's no way that you can talk about spirit or your own ruh unless you actually get the information from what is beyond matter. Are you guys with me? Let's do it again. What is your mind designed to dissect, study? Your intellect. What can it study? It can only study things that are matter. Why? We use ABCs of studying science and physics is that we use our seeing, we use our taste, we use our smelling, we use our hearing. All those are actually different methods to understanding the different dimensions in the world around us, right? ABCs in science. Well, yes, we managed to make those tools stronger than our own naked eye or our own science, our ability to study matter. We managed to make it stronger. But we still are within studying matter. To study outside of matter, you cannot whatsoever use matter and consider that that is your only source of information. Are you guys with me here? In other words, let's put a question. How old is God?
There's no age.
There's no age.
Yeah.
Why doesn't God have an age?
That is beyond.
He's beyond matter. God Almighty is beyond matter. Is there any way that I can one day through science discover God on an X-ray, on an MRI, something similar to that? No. Why? Because God Almighty is not matter. What your intellect is designed to study is matter. So to actually think that you can one day find God or even find ruh or find jinn or malaika in an X-ray or an MRI or whatever, all these different technology things, you're actually using a tool that is designed to discover and understand matter, but these things are actually metaphysical. They're outside and beyond matter. So in order to understand spirituality, you first have to acknowledge that as human beings, our intellect is narrow in its understanding. The first thing. And that's why the Lord Almighty actually said, إِيَتَّبِعُونَ إِلَّا الظَّنَّ وَمَا تَهْوَى الْأَنفُسُ وَلَقَدْ جَاءَهُم مِّن رَّبِّهِمُ الْهُدَى. They follow speculation. or their desires, and their Lord Almighty sent them huda, sent them guidance. What does that mean? Your understanding of the world, you're either going to use intellect, which can be dhann, which can be speculation, and not necessarily accurate data on everything. In other words, your intellect lacks the capacity and the potential to understand everything in this world. Part of what it cannot get to is really things like ruh, things like God, things like jinn, things like malaika, and things like shaitan, all these different things. You can't really get to it. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us, well, there's the other side, which many might use to understand world. They might use their senses. And their senses, especially in understanding morality, and let me call it the scope of morality, they would use their senses. And that's where you have different philosophies in understanding, how do we understand morality? Do we base it based on how much evil it brings if this was to be practiced on a universal scale, just like Kant, who actually said, well, there's the categorical imperative, and you've got others that said, no, if you feel that it brings you pain, then therefore it's painful, then therefore it's not good. But we know even that is actually short, because we know that sometimes pain is actually good. If you were to go to a neurologist and he starts poking you, and you say, I don't feel pain, the first thing that the neurologist is going to feel and say, I've got bad news here. That's not good news. Why? Because feeling pain is one way of knowing that there's something wrong. But it's not fully to only think that pain is only evil. It depends on which angle you're in. For a neurologist, not to feel pain is probably the worst thing that he would want to think about. But the second he sees that you're feeling pain, he's going to be really happy. Things are looking good. Right? Am I wrong? And that's the same thing. When we're looking at the foundation of understanding spirituality, it actually starts how and what epistemology do you base your knowledge on in understanding who you are, your spirit, and your purpose of life. These are the three dynamics. Before we speak about spirituality, the center is, where do you get your understanding about spirit from? So I'm not going to go into Aqidah right now, all right? But this is another base for us to know that when we're speaking about spirituality, you cannot separate it whatsoever from Aqidah. Now I'm going to go into another part, which is we're going to, alhamdulillah, we're all Muslim. So I'm going to tell you, there's another research about spirituality, another type of aqidah, that before we even speak about spirituality, we have to first set the foundation that if we want to speak about spirituality, we still have to set the foundation that you can only understand it by going through scripture, by going through the Quran and Sunnah. You cannot understand spirituality based on my own desires, based on philosophy, based on those areas. You have to go back to Quran and Sunnah to understand what spirituality is. Got it? So we're going to assume we would jump from that one. All right. Now, the other thing is that when Islam looks at, when we're talking about Islam, we're looking at, yes, those three dynamics, and where we're looking at your purpose of life, Allah Almighty is the center, and of course, how you practice and you put your own life in practice, how you implement the purpose, your center, and your own behavior in life, which is why when we look at the part about the body, of course, cannot function without the soul. Soul to mean the spirit, and the path for the soul is actually developed in both the soul and the body. Now, here's the thing. Right now, we're a lot of times everyone is talking about mental illness. All right. Is it necessarily true that if somebody has a mental illness, they have a spiritual decay. Not necessarily. But here's another thing. But does that also mean, on the other hand, that spirituality, or let me call it tazkiyah, cannot contribute to better spirituality? Tazkiyah. Does it also contribute to making better mental health? According to Islam, absolutely. According to Islam, absolutely. Because part of mental health is actually based in how and what you look at your own self, your own purpose in life. That is the foundation in how you relate to pain. All right? How you relate to pain, how you relate to trauma, how you relate to justice, because a lot of the different mental health issues are really a reflection to how we might, as human beings, actually go weaker in perceiving pain, in perceiving trauma that probably happened to us. But does that mean if a person goes through a moment of, let's say, a moment of depression, does that mean that they are spiritually decayed? Not necessarily, because sometimes it's our own body reacting to the pain. Even if you could be spiritually strong, you could be a believer. In fact, you could be a prophet. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually said about Prophet Yaqub, he said, وَبْيَضَّتْ عَيْنَاهُ مِنَ الْحُزْنِ فَهُوَ كَظِيمٌ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said about Prophet Yaqub, and his eyes turned white from the sorrow, and he was incomplete. The word is kadhim. Today, it's actually depression. What does that mean? Prophet Yaqub, his body reacted to the loss of his son in such a strong way that he actually became blind. It's part of our own nature.
Was it not because of his?
No. The ayah says, بِيَضَّتْ عَيْنَاهُ مِنَ الْحُزْنِ. It didn't say, notice, look at the wording. It said his eyes turned white. It didn't say from crying, but it actually said min al-huzn. The word al-huzn actually means that it was sorrow, it was sadness, it was anxiety. It was an anxiety that went beyond from just, let me call it, something that's affecting our feelings to affecting the body. And we know that even in psychiatry, we know that it can happen. Not only in medicine, can it happen that you can get such bad news that you can get a heart attack? You can get such bad news or so much trauma and so much stress that it can affect even your diabetes and your insulin and all that. We know that, right? We know that. So that side, that is the psychological side, let's say it that way, is also affected. But at the same time, it can also, the spiritual aspect of it, the spiritual advancement can also affect, just like it can harm, it can also improve in our spiritual health, in our mental health. Our spiritual health improves our mental health. Where? How? It gives us the hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What does that mean? So instead of focusing on the pain, instead of focusing on the weakness as human beings, it actually tells us to focus on the power of the Lord Almighty. It's changing your perspective. It's a spiritual healing. It's a therapy to tell you, don't focus on the pain. And I want you to take it away somewhere else. Focus on the ability and the hope in Allah Almighty to take away the pain. In where pain, the Lord Almighty told you that it will not be forever. That the sorrow, inna ma'al usri yusra, with every single usr, with every single hardship, there's going to be two yusrs. There are going to be two eases coming past your way.
How do you feel about like everyone saying you need to focus on yourself?
So
That's the thing.
the common thing right now that you need to focus on yourself, it depends on the context of that sentence. Like
For
even
people that when they're like especially things
like I said, it depends, Yasmin, it depends on the context of it. Because if the context to being focused on yourself, to look at it from the individualism perspective, in where it's you're the center, then that totally is a paradox to Islam. That totally contradicts Islam. But if it is to mean focus on yourself, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually tells you that we don't ask you about their sins. All you need to do is just do da'wah. Do da'wah, and you're not going to be held accountable for what everybody else is doing. So in that context, even Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually said, we're not going to ask you about their sins. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told him, فَلَعَلَّكَ بَاخِعٌ نَفْسَكَ, you're in such sorrow and you're taking it so much on yourself because they're not believers. Just focus on yourself. We're not going to ask you what other people are doing. So like I said, if it is in the context of individualism, then I would say that totally contradicts Islam. But if it's from the context of you are focusing on your iman and on yourself and don't take it beyond your scope to handle other people, then I would tell you that is actually within Islam. So it depends on the context.
Yeah, because now it just feels like everything is mental health equals face masks and doing what you love.
You know, I do have a whole lecture that actually talks about mental health. I do have a lecture on YouTube that talks about mental health, and that talks about how psychology and psychiatry are different and similar in Islam in two sections. The first part, which is the epistemological section, meaning the philosophy of it, and then the implementation of it. There are so many different things. I'll just say it that way. In short, there's so many different things that Islam totally stands against psychology, because in many ways, psychology is really tracing back in a lot of its epistemology, in its philosophy, to an atheist perspective and atheist foundation. But that doesn't mean that we would cancel psychology totally. We need the studies, the empirical studies, but there are certain things that we have to have specialists that have both, that have that knowledge, which right now contains a lot of jewels within it. Let's just say it that way. And we also have a lot of what is the word that I could use? Poison. So you need to have the Islamic understanding, and I don't mean Islamic understanding to mean, high school level of Islamic understanding, in where, I take them to Sunday school and the Sunday classes, and they take Islamic studies on the weekends, and then she goes and studies psychology, and she wears a hijab, mashallah, or even a niqab. But that doesn't necessarily mean that by studying psychology and wearing hijab, it doesn't necessarily make her that she's an expert in Islamic studies. Most of the times they're actually indoctrinated in Western psychology that is founded on atheist psychology. And the only outside is what I see that is really looking Muslim. So if that person is trained in Western psychology and doesn't really have an Islamic basis, I would be really concerned. I would be really concerned, because a lot of those departments are actually fully indoctrinated in the atheist in the atheist view, in all the different details of who you are, what ethics and what morality is and what a normal human being is. And of course, when you're studying psychology, you cannot separate ethics from psychology whatsoever. You can't. There's no way. Because when you're studying ethics, you're actually studying what is a normal human being, what makes something that is a standard of right, wrong, and the list goes on and on. All right, let's continue. So like I said, is spirituality psychological here or not? Of course, spirituality should not be detached or distant from the fundamental ontological question. This is one very important difference between Islam and psychology, is that in Islam, when we're talking about psychological healing in Islam, you can't separate it away from the core question, which is the ontological question. What is ontological question? Who you are, what you are, and why you come, what your purpose is, and why you're living in this world. And what should you be implementing in life? What is how you live based on? What is the standard? What is the paradigm? So this is not to be separated away from it. In fact, spirituality in Islam is actually going in parallel with that. And it tells you before you even talk about spirituality, spirituality is embracing who you are and the purpose that you were created for. Are you guys with me here? This is a very important, if I were to take a whole guideline of spirituality in Islam, I would just use this word. Spirituality in Islam, I'll say it again, is all about living who you are and the purpose you were created for. That's what spirituality, in short, is. If you don't actually live for the purpose that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created you for, then you're not living spirituality. Then you're living existentialism. What is existentialism? Existentialism is you creating your own purpose, which is introduced by John Paul Sartre. You creating your own purpose. And what does you creating your own purpose mean? Well, you create, which is also feminism. Feminism right now, we have a lot of even Muslim women activists that are going out. And, you know, we're actually feminists. Well, wait a minute. Do you know what that term means? This is a dangerous bomb within the Muslim community. Feminism actually comes from an atheist core in where it regards that you're matter in motion. And that's why it regards, well, you got to separate yourself away from your own biological creation. And that's why even like Simone de Beauvoir and the rest, and you've got so many others that were talk about abortion. What's the big idea about abortion? Why abortion? Why on earth are you talking about abortion? Because it's all about, like you had mentioned, like I said, the context. Care about yourself, individualism. It's all about yourself. You pursue your purposes. You pursue your goals in life, even if that meant you separating away from your own body, exacerbating yourself away from your own body and the dynamic of your biological, social relations, which is what is called gender. What is gender? Gender is trying to separate you. There's a separation between the biological and the social relations. In Islam, it tells you, wait a minute, no. Live the biological part of it. You cannot separate yourself away from it. Because your biological part is related directly with your social and even the original purpose of your own creation. You cannot separate away from it. The second you separate away from it is the same second that you're actually living in a delusion and you're trying to make a sense of it. But truth is not to be created, but is to be discovered. Because truth is supposed to reflect reality. The second that truth does not reflect reality, it's a delusion. Are you guys with me? The second that truth does not reflect reality, what reality? the reality of your biological sense, the reality of your purpose in life, the reality of who you are, making up your mind, your biology, your physical aspect, and your spiritual aspect. If truth does not reflect these three items, then you're living in delusion. Are you guys with me here? So when we're looking at spirituality, you see these three different things that we mentioned: your body, your mind, that is your intellect, and also your body, mind, and intellect, and also your spiritual part of it. And all the different three categories make up as fitra. All right, let's use this word. What does a fitra actually mean? The word fitra actually means something that you were created in the pure aspect form of it. So what does that mean? If I were to say something is fitra, I am basically saying by definition, that is the original form it was created in. That's the first side of it. In other words, without all the different pollutions. All right, that's the original form of it. What is the original form that I was created in? That's why everybody's caring about organic foods and making sure they're eating healthy, taking out all those different things. All right, that's because the focus on the materialism is really making them. I'm not saying it's not good to look at organic foods. It's actually very healthy. Healthy body actually gives you a lot of healthy in spirit as well. That which is why Islam tells you don't eat haram food. Don't eat haram foods, because it's telling you what you eat affects your spirituality. So please don't get me wrong. But in the end, is that there's also an organic food of thought. There's also an organic food for your spirituality. There's also an organic food for your body, which is why Islam actually tells you, when you look at the different halal and haram, they actually go in these three aspects. What are you eating? What are you looking at? The different senses. Because Islam actually tells you what goes on in your mind, the process of thinking is actually coming from what you're looking at, what you're listening to, what you're feeling, what you're eating and what you're drinking and what you're talking about and what you're hearing. All those different areas make up what your mind is thinking of. And of course, what your mind is thinking of also passes what your heart and your core is processing, and which is what affects our fitra. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there's a great focus on the point of fitra, because in Islam, it doesn't only consider fitra to only being just about your understanding of life and you questioning, but it also considers certain things in fitra, whether that relates to sexuality, whether that relates to the social relations, or whether that relates to what you eat, drink, and the list goes on and on. Go ahead, sweetheart.
I'm sorry, this is off topic, but you just mentioned about organic food.
Mhm.
So it's, it takes a little effort to do the whole organic thing. If we do it with the intention that I'm doing it because it's good to eat healthy, it's good to eat organic, is that Islamic? Or
It is Islamic, absolutely. You are supposed to be in Islam, although a little bit too much, so a soon question, but in Islam, feeding your body healthy, whether we're talking about the amount, or whether we're talking about the type of foods, or whether we're talking about where it's coming from, meaning halal, not halal, all of those different items actually make up part of what a Muslim is concerned about. That's why the Prophet ﷺ even talked about the amount and said a Muslim eats 1/3 for his air, 1/3 for his water and liquids, and 1/3 for his food. And then he also, this is the amount, he also talked about the part of how you even eat, what position you eat in, and said it was makruh to eat while standing. So if we're talking about even types of food in terms of halal haram, we're also going to be talking about, supposed to be also talking about healthy foods. Go ahead.
I don't know if I really do see a difference. I mean, I try to do my best with preparing the food and not using any frozen products, even with the kids. But sometimes I feel like it's not really, it's not worth the effort.
So
but the intention is there that, I'm doing it because this is how we should be living our life.
well, it's good, but here's the thing, is that a lot of that health facts details, is frozen healthy or not healthy, that's left for scientists to research. How healthy is it? But if you know something is not healthy, in Islam, la darar wa la dirar, you shouldn't be harming yourself. If it's proven, all right? If it's proven, you know that, for example, corn syrup is harmful, and you know that, you guys are better in science than me, and you know that, such particular chemical is actually harmful to the body, and you know the side effects, then you have to do your homework in making sure that your children are healthy. So that's part of living spirituality. And that's the thing, is that you cannot separate spirituality from, like I said, the physical side of it, the social side of it, and of course the spiritual side of it, or the ritual side of it. You can't separate these sides. They actually are who you are. And that's why in Islam, when in Islam, for example, it told you, well, even living spirituality, where the Prophet ﷺ said, even a morsel of food that you will put in your husband's mouth or your wife's mouth, that you will get a reward for it. Even though you might think, well, reward, what does that mean? It actually means a reward. Think of it as two different types of currencies. There's a currency where it adds number of deeds, but there's also a different type of currency where it reflects spirituality as well. It's a form of spirituality, and which is where the Prophet ﷺ actually said in the hadith, when the Sahaba, when the Prophet ﷺ actually said, وَفِي بُضْعِ أَحَدِكُمْ صَدَقَةً. فِي بُضْعِ أَحَدِكُمْ صَدَقَةً, meaning that even when you are intimate with your wife, you are actually getting an increase in spirituality. But the Sahaba were confused and said, how is it that ayati ahaduna shahwata? Would anybody and any one of us actually approach their wife out of lust, yet at the same time get a deed for it? In other words, how is it that we're doing something that is purely based on lust, yet it's an increase in our spirituality? The Sahaba themselves were really confused with that. And the Prophet ﷺ said, if he were to do it with someone that is not lawful to him, would he be getting a sin? He said, yes. He said, same thing here. If changing the currencies, if you were to get a sin, that means it's a reduction and a degeneration in your spirituality. If it is a degeneration in your spirituality, analogy-wise, then in halal, it's an increase in spirituality. You guys, you see that it's a math equation. It's a math equation. If this is a decrease, then halal should be an increase. You see what I mean? And that's where, when we're looking at whether it's a social dynamic or whether we're talking about social dynamic, meaning whether it's a social within with your atomic family, or whether it's an extended thing in where it's involving the whole community at large, that also relates to increasing spirituality. Even in Islam, you see, we go at a group type of spirituality, masjid, praying congregation, or whether it's going Hajj, there's that group, and there's the individual piece of it where you would make your fast and really nobody knows if you really are fasting or not. There's that individual approach. And at the same time, when we're looking at spirituality, you cannot isolate yourself, but you still have to have moments of trying to do that spirituality in a personal level. What does that mean? There's the spirituality that you practice in group, and there's the spirituality that you have to do in isolation. Think of it, congregation and isolation. And that's why moments of doing dhikr on your own moments of probably making a corner in your home that this is your place of dhikr, or probably moments of doing qiyam al-layl, has a secret connection between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Every single one of us has to have a moment of seclusion, a moment of isolation, where you're isolating yourself from every type of connection with anyone out there but you and Allah Almighty. So when we look at that, we actually see that, yes, there's that connection, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala although said, Inna khalaqnakum ya ayyuhan nas ya ayyuhan nas, what is the ayah? خلقناكم من ذكر وأنثى وجعلناكم شعوبا وقبائل. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us, ذكر, all the people, ذكر, أنثى, male, female, and made us into nations and tribes. But in the end, إن أكرمكم عند الله أتقاكم. The best of you, in other words, the highest in their level is really the one closest to the Lord Almighty. Now, here's the thing. When we're talking about spirituality, what does a spiritual decay actually look like? Well, here's one thing. You always want to connect it with the core. The core is every single person is born with a pure, innate instinct. That is il-fitra. And when you look at fitra, you're looking at the biological sense of it, the spiritual sense of it, and you're looking at the spirit, biological, spiritual, intellectual sense of it. All these three different items should always be considered. Now, the hardest part of spiritual decay, there's the part that relates to shubha and shahwa. What is that? The shubha relates to a misconception. In other words, think of it as a building. Think of it as a building. If the person, their understanding of their own existence, who they are, their purpose of life, why they were created, who Allah is, if that is full of misconceptions, then to speak about salah and to speak about the different spiritualities is really, I don't want to call it a waste of time, but I will just say you're going the wrong direction in helping that person. It actually starts from the beginning of it. The beginning. Who are you? Where are you heading? Which are the questions of al-fitra. That's the basis. If that has gone wrong, then the rest is going to go collapse with it. Think of it as a basis. If the building collapses, breaking some things, except with 9/11, things work differently, I guess. It went against all the different laws of physics, all right? But breaking a building starts from underneath. That's how it collapses, not from the top. All right? So when we're looking at spiritual decay, it starts with not being able to distinguish right from wrong. What does that mean? It's the epistemology. How do you get your sources in understanding right and wrong? Where do you get it from? Are you getting it from Quran, Sunnah, or are you getting it from what today is laid out in philosophy, that everything is relative, and I can go on and on, you guys know me. All right, so it starts with not being able to distinguish right from wrong, and of course getting accustomed to falsehood, then ending it as a norm, which is like qawm. What happened to them? Well, I started out with getting accustomed to falsehood, and then they got so accustomed to it that they actually started saying, just get them out of the country, get them out of our village. Why? These people are seeking purity. How disgusting. That's exactly how they started seeing it. How disgusting. If the foundation, if the perspective and the foundation of the understanding of right and wrong has gone wrong, then everything else will collapse with it. Now,
how common is it these days?
oh girl, don't get me started.
Yeah, so
Don't get me started. I can go on and on.
I have a question.
Go
What's
ahead.
then make you like stray away from the main thing. Just
All right,
so we can
but
wait.
let's see. Go ahead, Azza.
Okay. When you started talking about spirituality, my brain went somewhere else. When it's like even from halal, like
Mhm.
spiritual people, that's my understanding. Like even of halal thing, you get less. That make you more spiritual.
We're gonna get to
So,
that. We're gonna get to that.
Is it something?
Well, no, that's not actually an
Arba'atun
authentic
tumitu
hadith,
al-qalb,
so
one of them-
you should be okay.
It's not hadith.
No, well, it's not an authentic hadith.
I know about Ibn Khaldun when he said about eating so much affects your brain, and people who are really ulama,
That
they
actually
eat
is,
less.
that actually follows the legal maxims in Islam. Absolutely. It follows maqasid al-sharia. That
So
overeating,
halal for sure.
even if it's eating halal, overeating,
And I think
Overeating.
sleeping too, oversleeping, right?
oversleeping,
Yeah.
overeating, all those different things. That's why in the Sunnah there are a lot of details on how much to sleep, which side to sleep on, and the amount of eating, the amount of drinking, the amount of, and even social relations. All these different things, they relate directly. We're going to talk about that direct and indirect piece of it. They relate directly to your spirituality, and they cannot whatsoever be separated. All right, they cannot be whatsoever separated. But here, I'm trying to make this as the foundation when we talk about spirituality, and then later on we'll talk about the rest of the different things. But first, I wanted to lay out the foundation. All right. So when we're talking about getting accustomed to falsehood, all right, where I'm going back to the same topic because you're trying to get me faster. When you're talking about, like I said, there's the shubha and there's the shahwa. You're talking about the shahwa part. You're talking about the lust part. All right. But before we even talk about the lust part, we first have to talk about the mind part. All right, which is the misconception part. Because what leads to spiritual decay is two things: the misconception and the lust and the desire. Shahwa, shubha, and shahwa. All right. So when you're looking, all this is still within the shubha part, in where when your understanding of right and wrong is gone astray, when the person's definition of morality is gone astray, when that happens, then the person, which is why you look at Qawm Lut, Prophet Lut alayhi salam, you could see that there was great focus and emphasis on speaking about the practice of homosexuality, or what is called homosexuality, or to be better, mentioned as sexual aberration. All right, there was great focus on it. Why we don't read so much that Prophet Lut alayhi salam doing what Prophet Nuh and the rest of the prophets were doing, which is focusing on returning to the Lord Almighty? Well, that's because it can happen that the lust has gone so deep in the person's core that it affected their focus to even think properly in what matters. You guys understand what I'm saying? So their focus was so much about lust that to even talk to them about God, you're just going to be finding a closed door. There's just so much there. The lust has taken away their focus, that to hold any conversation with them on any, call it philosophical, call it aqidah, is going to be like blocked. And it's not always that you just want to focus on the shubha. Sometimes you also need to correct the shahwa, the lust, to get a focused mind thinking with you. Same thing. It makes no sense to speak with somebody that is drunk and talk to them about proving the prophethood of Muhammad ﷺ, or that the Quran is the word of God. This person's ability to process ideas is currently disabled. It's currently disabled. It's shut down. And it's the same thing. We're not just talking about mind in where it's affecting our ability to think in a sober way with alcohol, but that's the same thing when we're thinking about other addictions can also alternate or even, according to Islam, or even affect your ability to process thought. And to process thought actually means to process aqidah, to process understanding of God, to process understanding of your own existence. So you cannot separate that from the different sides of when we're talking about spirituality. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, كَلَّا بَلْ رَانَ عَلَى قُلُوبِهِمْ مَا كَانُوا يَكْسِبُونَ. Verily, verily, what they have been doing has affected and has fully locked and sealed their hearts. And in the Quran, it's really the heart that processes ideas. In other words, their behavior, lust, is really also a direct sealing item that can seal a person's ability to process thought or process misconceptions. You understand what I mean? So you can't necessarily think of, oh, I don't want to talk about shahwa and I'll only talk about shubha. No, wait a minute. Sometimes you got to work it out and actually get to the shubha by first removing the shahwa and getting a mind that is capable of thinking and processing what you're saying. You understand what I'm saying? Go ahead, Sister Fatima, Farhana, I think. You wanted to say something?
Not now.
Not now? Okay.
But long time ago, when we were talking about the creation of Adam,
Uh-huh.
at that time I had a question like in Quran says that Shaitan said, would you make somebody who will make fasad in the
Right.
in the world? So how did Shaitan know that the human being Adam will create fasad? Because
So
how
even
did he know?
he did see that he had a different capacity. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala introduced Adam to the Malaika, and of course Iblis was present. Iblis was not part of the Malaika. All right?
Yes.
How do I think of it? So he was telling the Malaika, but Iblis happens to be the one that didn't make sujood. You know, it's kind of like this. If I were to say, a king is coming, an important political official is coming. All right. And here it is, we've got an important political official coming in. And of course, all the different politicians were there and they were all dressed in suits and all of them. You too will feel obligated to dress in a suit like them because this is a formal gathering. And that's the same thing. If the Malaika were ordered to make sujood for Adam, well, definitely those that are on a lesser level would be even more obligated, which is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us in the Quran that Iblis, that he was min al-jinni fafasaqa an amri rabbih. He was actually from the jinn.
But he was like Iblis was he used to make ibadah for Allah.
The idea or the hadith that Iblis was Tawus al-Malaika and he was, it's actually not an authentic hadith.
Yes, okay, read that. But my part was like, why did we say that thing? Did he know that before?
Did he know
Were there
that?
any other creation before you?
There was of course, that's why it's called Khalifa. There was another creation before us.
So they
There were creations before us, absolutely. In fact, it's basically clear in the ayah that the Malaika knew that they were causing destruction and they were causing bloodshed and etc. Well, certainly, by the way, from the word bloodshed, certainly those creations or creatures were not jinn. They were a different creation. Were they the Netradals, all these different things? I have no idea. But they were certainly a different creation that the Malaika were aware of. That were causing destruction, that were causing bloodshed, and certainly they didn't have intellect. And which is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala introduced Adam's intellect as a different creation. Did that creation die out? Whatever happened to it? Allahu A'lam. But certainly he was expecting another form of fasad, all right? Because that's even what the malaika had expected. Got it? Even the malaika expected that. They were like, we're expecting this to be a generation going differently. All right, let's continue. So when we're looking at spiritual decay, confusion, lost in many paths, trying out so many different paths in search for answers. So they will try out, for example, it's like one time piercing, the other time tattooing, the third time drugs, the fourth time gaming, as a way to stimulate oneself away from thinking about purpose in life, from thinking about, or even wanting to do and live up to the purpose of life. It's wanting to search for stimuli. To stimulate is a way to get your focus and find happiness elsewhere. Why do we eat sugar? Why do we enjoy eating sugar? We know all the different things, dopamine and all these different things that you know are basically produced in our body to make us feel happy and to make us feel some kind of a sensation, pleasurable sensation, all these different things, whether through different things that we might do, or somebody cracking a laugh or cracking a joke or stuff like that. We know that it affects our pleasure. All right. But when we're looking at stimuli, some will actually live in those stimulants because it helps them find some peace elsewhere. But that's really based on the different spiritual decays, the confusion that they're in. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that they would be feeling lost. Well, why? Well, that's because your body and your physical stimulants, or the different, or not necessarily physical stimulants, but the stimulants that you would induce in or to your body are not necessarily bringing you happiness. They're not necessarily bringing you happiness. What brings you happiness is really the balance in where you would balance your body, your mind, and your spirit. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَنْ أَعْرَضَ عَنْ ذِكْرِي. And those that were turned away from the Lord Almighty. The word dhikri can involve different types of dhikr. The first type of dhikr is the oral dhikr. Oral dhikr. What is oral dhikr? La ilaha illallah. The visual dhikr. Your understanding of yourself, your purpose in life. That's the visual dhikr. Where are you heading? That's the visual dhikr. 3, the behavioral dhikr. What are you living your life based on? How do you define ethics? How do you live in terms of considering what standard? And there's the audio dhikr. You want to say something. What's going on? Oh, that's not scary. That's just a little pet.
I don't know, I was just.
Yeah, it's okay. Don't worry. Grew up on a farm. These things are pets. All right. Don't worry about it. No, it's okay. I grew up on a farm part of my life, so being around cattle and being around horses and pigeons, and by the way, it's not just the horse. The horse is going to have lots of beetles and lots of different things on it. And same thing with cows. The cows are the ugliest kind of flies on it, right? So I'm used to it. All right. So, okay, let's get back to different kinds of flies. Sadness and depression. All right. That's another type of spiritual decay. Fear and worry. I'm going to focus on that one, but then I'm going to, inshallah, try to conclude. All right. The other part, which is spiritual decay, is fear and worry. Quran emphasizes on that very much. Is that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala many times says, الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا لَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ. Those that believe, they would not find fear and they would not find sorrow. Why fear and sorrow? Fear is when you are lost in place. Sorrow is when you are lost in time. Let's do it again. Fear is when you're lost in place. Lost in place means what? When you're not worried, when you're not aware, in place, who you are, what you are, and why you're here. In place. in time, you don't know your start and when you're heading, where you're heading. That's time. So the person that doesn't live with the understanding of a purpose in life to be heading towards what really you were created for, which is purpose, which is akhirah, that's when they will feel the sorrow. That's where trauma, pain, and different things, when it comes in life, when they are lost in place and time. And that's why the Quran was telling us about how life began, what the story of Islam started out like, and what the Anbiya were doing. It's in order to tell us this is the history. Now, how do you remember? If this is the beginning, there's an end. It's either Jannah or Nar. In terms of place, the place, this is the dunya. And in place, there's the Jannah and Nar, al-Akhirah. All of it goes to the same direction. What is to be attained through spirituality? Number one, first thing, success in dunya and akhirah. Why did I say success in dunya and akhirah? Because when the person is living away from spirituality, they're also going to live in struggles in this dunya. Even in this dunya, they'll live the struggles. And even in the akhirah, that's a different story. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَأَمَّا مَنْ خَافَ مَقَامَ رَبِّهِ وَنَهَى النَّفْسَ عَنِ الْهَوَى فَإِنَّ الْجَنَّةَ هِيَ الْمَأْوَى. To summarize Islam, those that fear the status of their Lord Almighty, and they would prevent their nafs from il-hawa, from all the desires that it might take them into. فَإِنَّ الْجَنَّةَ هِيَ الْمَأْوَى. Then therefore, il-Jannah is going to be their ending. And of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ قَالُوا رَبُّنَا اللَّهُ تتنزل عليهم ملائكة ألا تخافوا ولا تحزنوا وأبشروا بالجنة التي كنتم توعدون نحن أولياؤكم في الحياة الدنيا وفي الآخرة. Let me translate this one and we'll conclude it with this one. Those that said, our Lord Almighty is Allah, the malaika would come down to them. What will it tell them? It wouldn't verbally say it to them, but the malaika will give them the support. Do not be afraid and do not feel sorrow, and have the hope and glad tidings to you in Jannah, the one that you were promised. And we are your supporters in this dunya and in the akhirah. Now, this is the core of spirituality, in where the core of spirituality, in where they would say and understand and reflect it in what? Now here, إن الذين قالوا ربنا الله ثم استقاموا. There's that part, ثم استقاموا تتنزل عليهم الملائكة. ثم استقاموا, I forgot to mention it here. ثم استقاموا. What is that? That in order to live spirituality, there's the beginning of it, that Allah Almighty, that center, that Allah Almighty created you, and that your Lord Almighty created you to implement a certain lifestyle. ثم استقاموا. If you would have آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات, then that is the core of spirituality in Islam. The core of spirituality will bring in the malaika to bless you during all the different times in your life, during your spirituality, and even when things go wrong in your life. And that's why أَلَّا تَخَافُوا, don't feel the fear, don't worry. And of course, it can happen that we as human beings can have so many different things where it would just go wrong. So connect with your spirituality, connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and remember, قَالُوا رَبُّنَا اللَّهُ ثُمَّ اسْتَقَامُوا. It's not, I didn't mention it here, forgot about it. ثُمَّ اسْتَقَامُوا comes with it. Your spirituality has two sides to it, and the malaika will come to you. the spiritual sense will come to you. And inshallah, next time we'll talk about more. We'll talk about more, inshallah, in the reasons for spiritual decay, is the misconception and the lust. And we'll talk about the criterions for spiritual development. We'll also talk about ways to attain spiritual development, inshallah. And that's a lot more to talk about.
Sister, can you go back? That was get the screenshot. Spiritual decay. This, no, yeah, but that one.
That one?
Previous-
Sure.
the Previous one.
Previous one?
Yes.
Okay.
Done.
So, inshallah, if you have any questions, inshallah, next time we'll continue more on spirituality. I know people usually expect when we're going to talk about spirituality to speak about all the different details, but I thought this was the, let's call it part one. And inshallah, we'll do part two, and where we talk about that tazkiyah that you were talking about, how to attain that spirituality by leaving a lot, which is asceticism and zuhd. We'll talk about that next time, inshallah. So next time is going to be more exciting than the philosophy of today, inshallah. So stay tuned. All right. I know today people are like, what? How many people got lost? One. Okay. Faiza, you didn't get lost?
No, not at all.
Not at all. Great. So Farhana,
Yeah.
what got you lost? Let's say it that way.
I understand.
Yeah, in the beginning, it was like a lot of philosophical
Okay.
talk.
Okay.
So what is spirituality part? That was a bit confusing.
That was a little bit confusing. Okay.
So I got
And
lost.
maybe just to simplify it.
Can we
because are
simplify
just
it?
at this level of knowledge.
Okay. Let's
I can
simplify it. Let's simplify it. I'll simplify it. Let's do it this way. I'll do it this way now. I'll hope.
Yeah, Aysha, can I say something?
Go ahead, Faiza.
Yeah, I will add only one thing, what I.
Can you get closer, sweetheart?
Yeah, so what I understand that the more, if you spend your life, everything what you do, you sleep, you eat, you have something in your mind for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and unintentionally you are connecting yourself with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because you are doing this, and that will help you to stay on the right path and maybe increase your spirituality. I mean, this is just what I feel.
Well, definitely, you summarized one side of it. The part that I think she kind of got lost on is the philosophical part, which I feel is really important to understand. I know that many times I might get into philosophy. Many times people would think that philosophy, you shouldn't be talking about it, you shouldn't study it. It is actually extremely important, because if you don't understand philosophy, you're going to be what we call in Arabic hatab layl. It's like you're going to a dark room and you're putting your hand on so many different things and you're putting it in your pocket. You could be putting a knife without you realizing, and you could be grabbing a chair, which definitely does not belong in your pocket. I mean, not a knife does, and you could be grabbing a flower. All right. What you see in the world around you right now is actually coming from a lot of the different thoughts that are surrounding you. What does that mean? Many times we could be, we're living right now in the US. And we just think of, there are people that are right now speaking about social justice, and hey, who would not talk about social justice? Who would stand against social justice? Nobody. Only an evil person would stand against social justice. But if you don't know what is defined or what defines social justice today, you could be a person that is promoting something totally against Islam without you realizing. It's really important not to fall in the different narratives that are thrown at you in the public arena. We have a lot of different activists, a lot of du'a that are, I would say, doing exactly like I said, hatibul layl. They would take this term and that term and that term and that term and put it in a context that they would think that is the definition for it. That's what it means, not realizing that it actually contains a whole different definition than the literal definition. Are you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And that's why before we use different terms, we have to understand the connotation that it carries and the details of what that is actually promoting. Most of our children are actually in public schools. And what that means is that a lot of what they are absorbing is actually coming from those philosophies. That philosophy, postmodern philosophy, is actually an atheist philosophy. If you don't know that it actually stands on that there's no meaning to life, it's the meaning to life is something that you create. In other words, it's all about existentialism, which I want you guys to just look at it. You create the meaning to life. A simple word for it, it's called existentialism. 2, there's no truth in morality. It's all about how you define morality. Simple word for it, relativism. It's really easy. Number 1, the other part, don't worry about how others might see truth or what others do. Just focus on yourself. The social aspect of it, focus on yourself. Don't worry about your parents telling you different things. It's all individualism. You as an individual, you're the core of everything. That's exactly what's happening. Now, how does it proselytize? How does it promote itself? Don't think, since there's no truth and everything is relativism, then therefore, all you need to consider is just how you promote things. How do you promote things? Use emotions. Don't talk about whether LGBT is right and wrong. You're being judgmental. Why? Because it regarded that there's no truth. Because it regards that there's no truth, there is no moral reference, there's no resource to identify and to define morality, then therefore, let's promote another type of morality in where we're being inclusive. What do they mean by inclusive? As long as you're able to accept every single person's approach to morality, that's when you're being inclusive. Except one type of person that cannot sit in that box. We cannot be inclusive with them. You know who that is? Guess who it is? The person that says that there is a definition to morality, that there is a reference to morality. You are not to be part of that inclusive pot. The second you speak of this is wrong, this is not respecting our children's desire or biological creation or whatever it is, you're going to be perceived and as being exclusive. How does it promote? Well, it's promoted through emotions. Let's use love. Let's use inclusive. Let's use embracing one another. Let's see all these different beautiful terms. That's exactly what's happening. I live within this. I'm actually a chaplain in St. Catherine.
Yeah.
You hear them talking about all that all the time, and they don't even realize. Or actually, many times they do, but it's money talks. It's money that talks. You pay. What will you get? You will get the departments working for you because, hey, they paid. And that's what's happening.
Yeah, I think I feel it's time of learning, not only for the kids, it's for us too, because I know sometimes even the kids come up with some question. I mean, I always teach my son, that definitely there's so many. So I remember he said, Mama, but you don't know, they are really nice.
They're
So
absolutely.
these, I mean, they're really nice.
Who are the people that are supporting Palestine? The LGBT. Who are the people that are supporting the Black Lives Matter? The LGBT. Who's supporting us? Who's supporting Palestine and all that? The Democrats. It's not the Republicans. I know that. But it's so sad to see a lot of the Muslim activists are losing what their Islam stands for. We're trying to be active, and then we lose when we're creating alliances, the identity that we stand for. The identity that we stand for. Who's supporting Muslim women and all that? It's basically the feminists. But then when we create an alliance, we basically forget. What happens? You get Muslim hijabi, who's standing out in a whole arena, who's standing out and marching with all that. Linda Sarsour and the other girls and all those. What are they doing? Abortion, abortion, abortion. That's what justice stands for. That's exactly what we're being indoctrinated in. Without us realizing, we would say, no, spirituality is in the masjid. Seriously. If we have a community, a Muslim community that is not aware of what philosophies they're surrounded by, they're easily going to be absorbed in it. And we're going to carry, here's the thing, the narrative. Because postmodernism stands on narrative. It feeds, it grows on narrative, not argument. What does that mean? It doesn't consider that there is truth anyways. That's why it doesn't work on talking about, let's see if something's right and wrong. To discuss an argument makes no sense with that. How do we promote ourselves? We use a narrative. How do we promote feminism? We're not going to talk about whether it's good for women to be mothers. No, we're going to bring out these women to cry on the microphones of how, because she was given the chance and the freedom to do abortion, that's when she became a doctor and was able to pursue a degree and get a job and all that. And of course, what does it create? It creates these sentiments of feeling so, sympathizing these women. And then all of a sudden we get the sentiment, men are our enemies. Yeah. Men are our enemies. And it's not just men that are enemies. Well, they're going to want to abuse us by making us get them. You know what? We're going to even kill the babies, even if it means abortion. That way, no man can have his hand on us and he cannot control us. That's exactly how feminism grows. But it's not just feminism, it's liberalism, it's Democrats, it's, you name those groups. Am I necessarily, would I vote necessarily for a Republican who's directly saying, I'm going to kill you? That's a different debate and that's a different discussion to talk about. I'm just saying, we first have to be aware of the philosophies / identities that are surrounding us, because if we're not aware of what kufr is, then we don't know what iman is. Simple as that. Simple as that. If you don't know what iman is, then you don't know what kufr is. If you don't know what kufr is, you don't know what iman is. Islam told you what kufr is and told you what iman is. The modern idolatry is not people worshiping idols. Modern idolatry is really those philosophies that surround us. So don't think of philosophy as, oh, it's just another department of different jargons. It's not different jargons. It's actually the ideas that are infiltrated in our movies, in our cartoons, in our children's books, in the so-called academia without us realizing. That's what's infiltrating our children's minds. They're being indoctrinated. We're being indoctrinated. And when you just think of it, oh, it's just in a modern way of looking at things compared to the traditional way of looking at things. If you don't know what kufr is, you don't know what iman is. If you don't know the poison and you're not aware of where that poison lies, then you're going to blindly take one without you realizing.
So
Aysha, what's the solution? Because our youth, they just see the upper part, and they're seeing all that, and they think this is the right thing, and this is being nice and being activist and all that. So
Well,
how to
here's,
handle this?
there are actually a number of different things. I think it's really important that we actually start from one, the imams in the masajid, the parents themselves, that to make them educated even about these philosophies and what they stand for, and how they're manifested in the different social dynamics, media, academia. If they don't know what that thought is, then they're not going to be able to scrutinize how it manifests in the different drama and the different schooling and the different sides that surround them. So once we get the parents educated, and once we get those that teach Islamic studies in the masajid educated, then those are the people that are educating the children.
And now
Those are the people, just give me a second. Those are the people that are educating the children. Those are the people that are opening the doors to the children. Who's giving the children the access to the movies? It's the parent. Who's giving the children access to internet and public schooling and all that? It's the parents that made the decision, right? It's the parents that made the decision. You made the decision. I'm sorry about that. I mean, when you make that decision, it actually makes the decision for the child. The child is not aware. So we can't talk about bringing awareness to the children when the children themselves, they're just subject to, let me say, the application of this philosophy. Once we bring awareness to those in control, which are the parents, those are the decision makers, parents, masajid, the imam, leaders, politicians, the Muslim activists. Once those are aware of what's going on, then we're going to be talking about preserving Muslim identity. But we can't be talking about preserving Muslim identity when all we're talking about is more of a pragmatic identity. What is the pragmatic identity? I'm just trying to get a vote. You're just trying to get a vote, but didn't think about what identity do I preserve? And that's what's happening. Most of the community right now, we're just, hey, Ilhan Omar reached to be a congresswoman. We're so happy about it. Would I vote for her? I would. But we have a very serious issue to discuss. The Muslim identity is concerned about the outside surface and forgot the identity is not an outside surface, but is a core on the inside. That's what makes an identity. If we're still going for the outside and all the shell and not looking on the core of the identity that we stand for, then we're in total loss. Then we really don't understand what Islam is all about. Islam is start from the very beginning. La ilaha illallah. You think the Arab didn't have morality at the time? Yes, they did do infanticide, but they had lots of morality. In fact, Abdullah bin Jad'an, he was the one to buy so many different slaves and free them. The Arab had beautiful akhlaq. In fact, the Prophet ﷺ actually said, إِنَّمَا جِئْتُ لِأُتَمِّمَ مَكَارِمَ الْأَخْلَاقِ. I only came to complete the gap, the remaining gap of akhlaq. Did they have akhlaq? They had akhlaq. They absolutely had akhlaq. But la ilaha illallah, if that is not in place to make up the identity of what makes social justice and what makes humanity, then we're definitely in a big problem. And if we're seeing Muslim activists that are not even working to preserve Muslim identity, but are working to preserve a shell, then we're definitely in trouble. Sorry, Habibti, Amna, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, to that point.
I love your clothes, by the way.
To that point,
Now everybody's looking at her clothes. Forgot the question.
how you're saying that we have to establish that foundation, that core with our children, and it is the responsibility of people who are in control. I completely agree with you, but I see I'm not educated enough. I'm not aware enough myself to give that kind of education to my kids, as well as even most of the leaders in the opposition, the Islamic leaders, I feel that sometimes they don't even
Well, I
answer-
must admit, right now, I am starting to see glimpse of it. Maghrib Institute did a number of different lectures on postmodernism and atheism. Hamza Youssef is starting to talk about it. There are actually a number of different leaders that are actually right now bring it to the surface as this is the modern idolatry that we should be considerate of. So, you know, once we spread that awareness, that's when we'll see the change.
Right, and why is it that there's not enough interest? That's what I was.
I think there's not enough interest because a number of different things. These terms are usually hard on people. People don't usually relate with, let me say, words that are sounding too academic, let's say it that way, in a totally different field. So most of the Muslim community, we've got lots of doctors and engineers and or businessmen like the Palestinians. All right. So we've got people that are in these two sides, philosophy, and it doesn't mean that I'm encouraging people to study philosophy, but people studying Islamic studies, and even those that are studying Islamic studies, unfortunately, even when I studied Islamic studies, I was only one professor that was always focused, who's actually a philosophy major from Boston University, who was always, Allah Yajzil Khair, Dr. Mustafa Abu Swai, who was the one that was always focused on, no, studying philosophy, and these philosophies is actually the core of studying Aqeedah. So it's until now, let's say those that studied Islamic studies are far and not introduced to the modern idolatry. So it still is in, let me say, the beginning of it. We're still in the very beginning of it. So, but change is actually taking place. And on the other hand, is that, you know, you could see most of the Muslim communities more on the scientific, not the humanities departments. And because most of them are more on the scientific end, those different sides of processing ideas, they're really not introduced to it. Not to mention that a lot of these ideas are really foreign to the Muslim community. They're very foreign because most of the Muslims that are coming from the West, and right now these philosophies are going beyond borders with the media, and of course with internet, it's going beyond borders. You will find it in Pakistan and people don't realize where it's coming from. It's being taught in schools, Pakistani schools, Arabic schools, and the list goes on. And many times people don't realize where it's coming from, but really it comes from these philosophies. Most people don't know where it's coming from. So not until we understand and we're able to dissect and trace where these ideas are coming from, then we're not going to be able to say, oh, this comes from a different source, take it out. This is totally not Islamic. So it's really sad that we have Muslim scholars that are not aware of these philosophies, and we have Muslims that are embracing these philosophies that don't know what Islam says about them. So we become seeing two groups that are sitting in two different rooms.
Not even two groups, because the people who are
Two different
studying
rooms.
that are very strong, way more in number.
Absolutely.
And the one who are trying to
Absolutely.
tackle are way
Which is
more
what we
yes.
call secular and
Yes.
Islamist, and people are thinking,
We
right.
understand what is going on, it has already spread
Yep.
over and people
So
are-
when we actually become more aware to trace where these ideas are coming from, then you'll be able to trace the narratives and what that word entails, what that sentence entails. But you won't be able to know the narrative if you don't actually know the philosophy and what the core philosophy of it is. You know what I'm saying? Like, you won't know, you would just think of feminism, it's just women talking about women's rights. What's the big idea? Come on, who wants to go against women's rights? Sounds so innocent, doesn't it? Who would want to pro-life or pro-choice? Why would anybody want to go against somebody's choice? Pro-choice, I'm pro-choice, of course. Because the second you don't say you're pro-choice, that means you're against people's choices. You're somewhere trying to enforce people to make your decision. You're nothing but an extremist and another type of an ISIS. trying to force your own ideas on people, imposing ideas. Sounds a very nice narrative. You get brainwashed with it without you realizing. So once we only take the narrative, then we're definitely in danger. You want to say something? Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to know, you talking about purpose of life, will you be explaining it more in detail in your other lecture? Will it be the same for everyone, or will it be different for every individual? What is the purpose of life? Like, for example, I'm gonna build a school, and then I'm gonna be consumed with it.
So purpose of life is the same for all of us. All right? Which is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us to be worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to worship Allah Almighty. All right? Now, this is the purpose of life. The other part, that inni ja'alun fil ardi khalifa, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created you as a khalifa, building, civilization, all these different things. Civilization doesn't mean modernity, doesn't mean big buildings. It means, what are you going to be tested in? You're going to be tested in الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ. There's the faith, and there's what are you doing in behavior? What are you doing to implement the definition of civilization? What does that mean? To implement the definition of civilization actually means to implement morality, actually means to implement principle that is laid out by the Lord Almighty. That's what makes civilization. Wait a minute, so why not, all the other things? Well, that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us about Thamud and Ahqaf and told us about Ad. He said, oh, they had great modernity, all right. They had great buildings. Oh, and not only great buildings, but they had beautiful gardening and beautiful, all these different things. They sure definitely created a very nice, civil, modern lifestyle. In fact, they were actually healthier than our times. They definitely had a healthier lifestyle. They had all the different modernity, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala still called them Jahiliyyah. Why were they called Jahiliyyah? Weren't the people of Qawm Lut also living in modernity? Oh, absolutely. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala still called them Jahiliyyah because Jahiliyyah is different than modernity. Jahiliyyah is living the principle of the Lord Almighty. The principle of Lord Almighty cannot be attained, which cannot be attained if the person had exacerbated himself away from the fitrah, from the instinct that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created in, and think of fitrah, the biological aspect, the social aspect, and the spiritual aspect. You cannot attain it. So civilization, creating a civilization is by living the akhlaq, is by living the principle. Modernity, all these different things, the previous generations had even more than that. Now, living in ibadah is more comprehensive than ritual, because living in ibadah is actually living the word of Allah Almighty. That's what we're being tested in. In the end, purpose of life is Jannah or Nar, is deciding, are you living for Jannah or for Nar? That's your purpose. What about having a school? That's a tool. Building a school, buying a well, or I don't know, digging a well in Africa or Pakistan, whatever it is. That's a tool, not a goal. The goal is Jannah. The tool can differentiate from one person to another. I'm a rich woman. I'm not a woman of da'wah. I only have money. I'll go and probably, I don't know, open a place that teaches Islam. It's part of it. Of course, it leads to it. It leads to it. You can't separate it. It leads to it. But the purpose is supposed to reach to that goal. You see what I'm saying? So even, for example, my children getting excellent degrees in mathematics and art and all these literature and all these language arts and all that stuff. All right. What's the purpose? I want him to get a degree. I want him to get a scholarship. That's not a purpose. That's a tool. To get a 4-year degree, or become a doctor, or become an engineer, whatever, that's a tool. And when we put that in perspective, that's when you would be considerate about, well, what should I teach, and what should be my priority in teaching my children? What should be the priority? Should the priority be my children getting a degree and getting a good job? Or should me teaching them their Islam and how to live their Islam, because that's the main goal, be the priority? You understand what I'm saying? Which is my goal? If, yeah, I'm going to let my son sleep, haram, I don't want to wake him up, what's going to happen? Your son is going to get used to that. As long as I wake up for school, that's okay. Waking up for Fajr is not an issue. What did you instill in the child's subconscious mind? That the goal is school and grades and not Jannah. You see what I'm saying? How do you train it in yourself and in your children? I'm on time when it comes to work, but when it comes to salah, I'll delay it. I'm doing all that in front of people to show that, you know, I'm rich and I've got all these different luxurious things. What are you telling yourself? I care about people's thoughts about me more than Allah Almighty.
So unfortunately, people's standard of success has changed drastically.
Absolutely. It's
I
very
mean, success is
materialistic.
not about worldly gain,
Absolutely.
how many peace you have.
Materialistic. That's the thing. It's materialistic understanding. It's a materialistic approach to life. Once that materialistic approach to life is there, that's when you will see people heading to what makes me successful is what I'll be considering as my goal. But once we change that, unless we change that, then we're not really living spirituality.
And then
Spirituality
again, for
starts
that
from the
reason,
inside.
you have to learn your religion.
Absolutely.
You have to learn what is your purpose,
Absolutely.
why you're here, you know, and where are you going to go back to?
Absolutely.
So if these things, even us or our kids don't know, then they're not going to reach to a higher level.
Absolutely. Even when I teach tafsir, I have a series of tafsir every single Friday. When I teach tafsir, always try to relate it to our times. Always try. And believe it or not, but I even teach tafsir in philosophy. And I speak about philosophy even in tafsir, because you cannot disconnect it. Even Quran is actually telling you, wait a minute, review those thoughts. That's how the story began. But the story still continues in our times. But the only thing that changed is not the idea, it's how the idea is presented. That's it. The idea is really the same. It's just how it's presented. It's the same. It's the core. The core is the same. So the same idolatry, it's just presented differently. And don't think that the people during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, or even during the other prophets, don't think of them as, oh, they were stupid. Oh, they had intellect. Oh, they had philosophy. They had science. They had all the different things. So don't think of the people today as necessarily smarter. We wouldn't have gotten that far if they didn't actually do what they had done. And this is really important to even teach the children. The story is the same. It's not that, oh, long ago, when these people were during the Stone Age and they were wearing barely anything on their private parts. You totally got the wrong idea. Go ahead.
How do we establish spirituality? Like, I mean, I think if you call it just the do's and don'ts, and where you mentioned the kids say they're just not feeling it because they're too focused on this do's and
Which is why today, and I didn't want to start with do's and don'ts. It's so easy. The do's and don'ts, we all know all those different do's and don'ts, and which is basically called the takhliya and the tahliya, which is really here. Okay. But that's a very superficial way to speak about spirituality, because then you're only talking about the outer shell. If you don't talk about spirituality, where you say and actually feel La ilaha illallah, that outer shell is just going to fall pieces, dropping all around you. Well, first, we build the foundation of aqidah. That's the first thing. The foundation of aqidah, foundation of creed. La ilaha illallah. That's the first thing. 2, tafsir is extremely important. It's extremely important. 3, role models. Role models, here's the thing. It's actually really hard to have a role model living out around you. It's really hard. I'm not your role model. I have my mistakes. And trust me, none of us are. We have our mistakes. Who's your role model? The people that died on La ilaha illallah. Stories of scholars, stories of mujahideen, stories of sahaba, stories of anbiya. That's what creates a role model. How did they live the legacy? Once we hear those, that's when we build within us those role models. How do we teach it? Well, we teach it. That's why the Quran was actually teaching it there, telling us that's where the legacy actually starts in, and that's how you apply it. But if we don't know La ilaha illallah, we don't know how to apply it, we don't know role models that really lived it, we're going to find ourselves falling in the cracks. We're going to, not only our children, but we too are going to be falling in those cracks. And fourthly, which is the environment. A lot of these philosophies, this is just a small young child. Talking to him about existentialism is nothing but jargon. Talking to him about postmodernism, what are you talking about? The second you use that word, his mind shuts off. Makes no sense. You have to be aware to actually, just by looking at the words, you have to be aware to start scrutinizing, analyzing. This idea is trying to spread this type of philosophy. Turn it off. Not my world. It's going to be really hard for you to actually sit and watch every single movie with the child. And especially, it's like, how should I know what idea this traces back to and where that philosophy comes? It's really hard. But these people are experts, by the way. These people are experts. These people are implementing certain ideas to be put in children's cartoons and movies. Absolutely. 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 Yep. You would not notice it. You would not notice it. It's basically in there, and it becomes, and here's the thing. The scariest things that they might have in movies are things like clowns or Chucky. Why? Because you would assume an innocent doll is innocent. But Chucky all of a sudden becomes this evil boy who's stabbing people. A clown is supposed to be bringing happiness and joy. But then this clown is all of a sudden bringing in crime, right? And that's the thing. And then that's why I fear cartoons and movies more than I fear schools. Because when they're calm and seeming harmless, that's when they're most dangerous. Movies and cartoons are actually the biggest danger. Movies and cartoons are actually the ones to bring about the biggest danger in, without us realizing, indoctrinating the children in a way that seems so innocent, in a way that seems it's just a narrative, it seems it's just a story to watch. It's just a story to watch. It's Pocahontas that fell in love with a white guy. What's the big idea? Why are you against love? Ariel, she just fell in love. She's a mermaid, but she's in love with this white guy, this human guy. Why are you guys against love? Superman is right now in love with Robin, and it's a homosexual type of relationship. There you go, without you realizing. Now, creating the environment cannot happen unless you get them out of a polluted environment. You have to do your homework. What polluted environment? Is it the movies? Is it the gaming? That seems like it's just a game. He's just shooting. What's the big idea? He's just breaking blocks. Seems very innocent. Without you realizing it's making a thought. It's building in an idea. You think of it as an innocent game. Not only is it killing time, not only is it killing the brain cells, but it's also bringing in ideas. It's telling you that it's okay to do these things. Without you realizing, you're being indoctrinated. Your children are being indoctrinated. I would say,
Sorry to interrupt. This is a great discussion, but we have to do dua. And then
fair
we can
enough.
continue, Allah. We can continue.
It's Amna's fault, not my fault.
Thank you.
It's Amna's fault, right?
No, it's not. It's nobody's fault.
Oh,
She
nobody's
has good
fault.
Questions, but people are ready. Yeah.
I'm so sorry, everyone, for taking a long time. I find you guys always have to, stop me in the middle because I can get carried away. And trust me, I can spend the whole day talking. I can spend the whole day talking. I can spend the whole day talking.
Yeah. No, Jazakallah.
Who's Sister Rania?
I know one person. She's from Egypt. Yeah.
Okay, Rania Rashid.
Yes.
Okay. So we're just going to make dua, inshallah. Allahumma hdina fi man hadayt. Oh Allah Almighty, guide us as those that you have guided. Wa tawallana fi man tawallayt. And support us and be our authority and guide us as those that you have guided. Oh Allah Almighty, show us what is right as right and make us from those that implement it. And show us what is wrong as wrong and make us from those that abstain from it. Ya Allah Almighty, keep our children and ourselves and our husbands and our spouses away from the fitan and keep the fitan away from them. Oh Allah Almighty, make us from those that will follow what you had guided us to do. Oh Allah Almighty, make us from the Salihin and from the Rashideen, and make us from those that will read the Quran throughout the day and throughout the day and night, and make us from those that will implement it in life. Ya Allah, bring us light in our sight and light in our hearing, and light from above us and light from in front of us, and light from behind us, and light, and make us light, and make us from those that spread light. Ya Allah, Ya Hayyu Ya Qayyum, we ask you to give us halal rizq, good health, and good deen, and good ilm, and make us from those that always bring good and preserve the Muslim identity in ourselves and our children. Ya Allah, let our children take the Salihin, and let us as well, our children and us and our spouses, take the Salihin as in the Anbiya and the Siddiqeen and the Shuhada. Take them as the role models. Ya Allah, make us from those that will only say haqq and spread haqq, and make us from those that will do what is right and what is righteous. And Ya Allah, forgive our sins and forgive us, and wipe our sins away from us. And Ya Allah, gather us with the Siddiqeen and the Salihin and the Shuhada and the Anbiya, and make us from those that will be granted elevation in this dunya and in the dhikr and in the akhirah. Ya Allah, just as you have gathered us in this home, Ya Allah, gather us in Jannah. Ya Allah, make our graves spacious on us and make it full of light. Ya Allah, make us from those that will always gather on haqq and gather on righteousness, and make us from those that will always be part of those that will gather on salah and gather on and piety. Ya Allah, keep fasad and keep delusion away from us and away from our children and our spouses. Ya Allah, Ya Hayyu Ya Qayyum, give shifa for Sister Aysha Rana's brother, Tayyib Rana, and give shifa for Rania. And Ya Allah, bless and give and shed your mercy on Saima Yasser's father, and our parents who had died, and shed your mercy on the ones, the beloved ones, our beloved ones that have died, and the ones that have an illness and are struggling with their families. Ya Allah, shed your mercy on them. Ya Allah, if any of us is struggling in her home with her children, bring them and give them guidance. Ya Allah, if any of us is struggling with her husband, Ya Allah, replace the struggle with happiness and with reconciliation and with hidayah and with guidance. Ya Allah, Ya Hayyu Ya Qayyum, gather us in Jannah and make us from those that will always be gathered in haqq and love for your sake. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نستغفرك ونتوب إليك ونشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت وصلى اللهم على سيدنا محمد. Inshallah, we'll gather next time and we'll continue. I think this was a very long discussion. Yeah, sure.